A lost millionaire asked a florist for help without knowing he would fall in love with her. The rain fell heavily over Boston that morning, painting the streets a melancholic gray and making the few pedestrians hurry their pace. The usual bustle of Beacon Hill was muted by the constant patter of drops on cobblestones and shop awnings. Among all those sounds, however, one stood out softer, almost intimate, the whisper of flowers being arranged in their buckets by delicate hands. They were April's hands. Behind the fogged window of her small flower shop, April's garden, the young woman finished placing a bouquet of lilies next to a handful of white daisies, her hair pulled back in a somewhat messy bun, let strands escape that fell over her serene face. She wore a simple green apron that contrasted with the colorful array of flowers around her. For her, each morning began the same way, opening the shop before anyone else, smelling the fresh stems, losing herself in the silence of her refuge. What she didn't know was that this morning something would break the calm, and forever. That's when she saw him. Outside, under the rain, a man in a dark suit stood motionless in front of her window, soaked to the bone with the lost expression of someone who didn't quite know what he was doing there. April blinked, intrigued. It wasn't common to see someone dressed so elegantly on these humble streets, much less someone who seemed so out of place. The stranger, as if sensing her gaze through the fogged glass, raised his eyes to hers. And for an instant, both looked at each other in silence, as if the rain itself had stopped to observe them. He finally took a step toward the door. The bell chimed as it opened, letting in a cold, humid breath. April felt a shiver, but didn't look away. "Excuse me," the man murmured with a hoarse, tired voice. "I'm lost. I need help finding an address." His words were nothing more than that, a simple request. But for April, something in his tone, in the way his gray eyes sought her, left her breathless. He didn't seem like a man accustomed to asking for help, and yet there he was. She set aside the flowers she was holding, and offered him a half smile, the one she reserved for those who came to her shop carrying more sadness than flowers. "Of course," she responded sweetly. "Tell me where you need to go." The man pulled a crumpled paper from his pocket and handed it to her, without taking his eyes off hers. April noticed that his hands trembled slightly. "It's not very far," she said, after reading the address. "But with the rain, maybe it would be better if you took shelter here for a moment, while it clears up." He lowered his gaze, as if that gesture moved him more than he was willing to admit. He nodded silently, still not moving from the threshold. The bell rang again when she herself closed the door to cut the wind. And there, amid the aroma of flowers and wet earth, he allowed himself to breathe. The silence between them was full of questions that neither dared ask yet. But something had already begun to bloom, something that neither of them knew how to name. If this story is already moving you in these first moments, subscribe now, so you don't miss how this unexpected encounter continues. April indicated a chair near the counter, and he sat down slowly, clumsily, as if he couldn't remember the last time someone had offered him a gesture of kindness. She returned to her flowers, though her eyes kept traveling to his silent figure. There was something broken in him, and yet there was also something that invited her to discover it. And so, while the rain persisted outside, and the petals shone in impossible tones, Ian remained there in that small refuge of flowers, wondering for the first time in years if perhaps he was exactly where he should be. The story was just beginning. The sound of the rain faded with the passing hours, but Ian didn't seem in a hurry to leave. He remained seated in that wooden chair, watching April's movements as she attended to the few customers who entered. His gaze slid between the flowers, between her hands, between the small gestures that made her different from anyone else he had ever known. In his world, everyone moved with calculated coldness, like chess pieces on a crystal board. But there, within the walls of that humble flower shop, nothing seemed planned, and yet everything fit together. When the rain stopped completely, Ian stood up slowly, adjusted his wet jacket and approached the counter. "Thank you for letting me stay," he murmured, with a slight smile that seemed foreign to his face. "You're welcome," April replied, returning the smile effortlessly. "Sometimes one just needs a little time to get oriented." He observed her for a few more seconds before leaving. And when the door closed behind him, April felt something strange, a small pang of emptiness, as if the silence of her shop was now too heavy. But what April didn't expect was to see him return the next day. It was 11 in the morning when the bell rang again. April looked up and there he was, no longer in the soaked suit but with the same disoriented expression in his eyes. "Good morning," she said, dropping some lavender sprigs into a vase. "Good morning," he replied, barely hinting at a smile. At first, Ian invented an excuse. He asked about a bouquet for a supposed friend, took his time deciding between tulips and roses, and left as quickly as he had arrived. But April had already noticed that he wasn't looking at the flowers. He was looking at her. The next day he returned, and the day after that too. Soon his presence became part of the routine. She asked him about his day while tying bouquets. He pretended he was just passing by to buy something small, a daisy, a lily, even a single eucalyptus leaf. But his eyes always said something else, a mixture of fascination and fear, like someone approaching an abyss and not knowing whether to jump. And although April remained the same as always, she began to notice how something stirred inside her. That sensation that simple things were no longer so simple, that her world so orderly, was beginning to fill with questions. Ian, for his part, didn't understand what pushed him to return. He had spent his life chasing after million-dollar contracts, rubbing shoulders with politicians, with bankers, with women who looked perfect at gala dinners, and empty in bed. And yet there he was, every morning, like a lost child in front of a candy store window, finding in an anonymous florist everything he didn't find in his own reflection. That afternoon, as he left with an improvised bouquet in his hand, April saw him stop in front of the door, as if he were about to say something, but he didn't. He just looked at her one more second, as if he wanted to memorize her, and left in silence. She remained by the counter, her heart beating faster than usual. She knew something was about to change, though she couldn't name it. She knew he wasn't like the others, and that worried her. When she closed the shop that night, April turned off the lights and stopped for a moment in front of the window. Outside, the street lamps spilled their light over the empty square. In her reflection, for the first time she didn't see herself alone, and without knowing it yet, both had already taken the first step toward a path with no return. That night, Ian arrived at his luxury apartment in Boston's Back Bay. The doorman greeted him with an impeccable bow. The private elevator took him to the penthouse, and upon entering, he was welcomed by the pristine and frigid silence of a place more like a museum than a home. Everything was exactly as always: the perfectly ordered living room, the dim lights, the aligned curtains, and yet Ian had trouble recognizing it as his own. He left the bouquet he was carrying on the kitchen counter, a small bouquet, made by April that afternoon, which had promised to brighten any corner. But not even the perfume of the flowers was enough to dispel the sensation of emptiness that had accompanied him for months, perhaps years. He took off his jacket, poured himself a whiskey, and sat in front of the large window, with the illuminated city stretching at his feet. On the coffee table, his phone vibrated insistently. It was Elena, again. Elena, his fiancée. The woman he had been engaged to for a year, due to a mixture of convenience, tradition, and family pressures. Beautiful, elegant, influential, everything that was expected of a wife for him, but also everything he could no longer stand. He didn't answer the call, nor the next one, nor the one after that. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass and closed his eyes. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to feel a glimpse of fear of what he was doing, fear of how a simple florist was dismantling, little by little, the wall he had built around his heart. The next day, he was late to the office. His assistant informed him that his father was waiting for him for an urgent meeting, but Ian barely listened. He signed papers without paying attention, returned calls with monosyllables, and left before lunch, among the curious glances of his employees. He ended up, as always, in recent days, in front of the flower shop. He didn't bring a prepared excuse this time. He simply entered and greeted April with a tired smile. She returned the greeting naturally, though she couldn't help but notice the dark circles and stiffness in his shoulders. "Today I won't buy anything," he said almost in a whisper. "Just can I stay here for a while?" April looked at him, surprised, and then nodded. "You can stay as long as you need." While she arranged some peonies, he sat in his usual corner and watched her in silence. There was something hypnotic about the way she moved her hands, about the calm with which she filled each space with color and life. And he, so accustomed to everyone trying to impress him, felt that she had nothing to prove, that she simply was, and that disarmed him. For her part, April was also beginning to feel the pressure of that daily closeness. It was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore Ian's long looks, the way he sometimes stood motionless, looking at her as if she were the only person in the entire city. And although she tried to convince her heart that there could be nothing between them, each day, it became harder to believe her own lie. That afternoon, when he left, April saw him stop in front of the door and turn to see her once more. For an instant, their gazes met, long, deep, full of everything neither dared say yet. And when the door closed behind him, April felt how a question grew in her chest. What do I do with this man who is changing my life? The following afternoon, the flower shop smelled of fresh jasmine when Ian appeared again. This time he wasn't wearing a suit. His jacket was linen, his shoes less formal, and even his hair seemed more rebellious, as if he had left behind, even if just for a few hours, the rigidity of his world. April noticed it instantly, and that small change stirred something in her chest that she preferred not to name. He entered with a determined step, and a more frank smile than usual. "Today I'm not coming for flowers," he announced, fixing those gray eyes on her that so disturbed her. "I'm coming for you." April, surprised, stared at him, her hands full of white daisies that almost fell to the floor. "For me," she murmured, trying to sound indifferent. "Yes," he replied without hesitation. "I was wondering if you would accept going for a walk with me, now that it's not raining." The silence became heavy between them, barely broken by the soft buzzing of the bell when a gust of wind pushed the door. April didn't know how to respond, not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't dare. Going out with him was opening the door to something she wasn't sure she could handle. "I can't," she finally said, lowering her gaze. "I'm busy." He observed her for a few seconds, with a soft sadness in the corner of his lips, but didn't insist. He simply left a small box wrapped in brown paper on the counter. "Then at least accept this," he said, before turning and leaving. When April, intrigued, unwrapped the package, she found a leather-bound notebook and a handwritten note. "So you can keep everything you don't dare say out loud." She stood motionless, holding her breath, and her cheeks burning. How could that man see her with such clarity? How could he know that she kept silences that no one else suspected? That night, when she closed the shop, she found the notebook on her bed, and for the first time in years, she dared to write in it. She started with her name, then wrote his. After that she couldn't stop. The following days, Ian kept coming. He didn't insist they go out, but he always found small and delicate ways to get closer to her. A special bouquet for the window, a cup of hot coffee on the coldest morning of the week, a complicit smile when no one was watching. And April, little by little, began to tear down her own barriers. Although she wouldn't admit it out loud, she waited for the sound of the bell every minute, and when he entered, her whole world seemed to light up a little more. But at night, alone in her room, fear crept back through the cracks. Who was that man really? What place could there be for someone like her in the life of someone like him? She told herself she shouldn't get her hopes up, that surely she was just a passing distraction for him. But her heart no longer listened to her reason. One Saturday afternoon, while arranging some red roses, April noticed that Ian hadn't appeared all day. She tried to concentrate, but uneasiness grew with each passing hour. When the bell finally rang at dusk, she looked up with a mixture of relief and expectation, only to find herself with a stranger, asking for a bouquet for a wedding. Her heart sank in her chest without being able to help it. While preparing the bouquet, her mind wouldn't stop wondering, what do I really mean to him? And what would I do if one day he doesn't come back? And you, would you dare to open your heart to someone from a world so different from yours? Tell me, in the comments. That night, when she closed the shop, she sat alone in the window, looking at the lights of the square, and holding the leather notebook in her hands, as if it were an anchor, or a promise. She didn't know what to do with what she was beginning to feel, and deep down, she feared it was already too late to stop it. On Monday morning, April opened the flower shop earlier than usual. She had slept little, restless, reviewing in her mind every gesture of Ian's, every word of his, every silence charged with something she couldn't quite understand. She didn't know why he hadn't returned on Saturday, or Sunday, and no matter how much she tried to convince herself that it shouldn't matter, she couldn't help feeling an uncomfortable emptiness in her chest. But that same morning, in Boston's Back Bay, while April arranged daisies in her window, Ian was trapped in another kind of storm. His father, a man with a hard countenance and authoritarian voice, was waiting for him in the meeting room, with Elena by his side. Ian's fiancée was as impeccable as always, her heels echoing on the marble as she looked at him, with a mixture of impatience and suspicion. "Where were you this weekend?" she asked, not bothering to disguise her cutting tone. "We have commitments, Ian, and you disappear without giving explanations." He breathed deeply, keeping his gaze on the floor. His father pierced him with his gray eyes. "You can't keep behaving like a teenager, son. If you want to keep this surname clean, and our reputation intact, you better fulfill your duties." Ian didn't respond. He couldn't, because deep down, he already knew he didn't want to keep fulfilling those duties. The idea of sitting down to dinner with hypocritical businessmen, and holding Elena's cold hand in front of the cameras, was becoming increasingly unbearable, especially since he had met April. But that he couldn't say, not to them, not even to himself. That afternoon, after enduring an uncomfortable lunch where Elena smiled for photos, while digging her nails into his arm, Ian excused himself, and went out to the street. He needed air, freedom, and without thinking too much, he ended up walking to April's garden. She received him with a faint smile, though her gaze betrayed the question she didn't dare ask. "Why didn't you come?" He lowered his gaze, as if the simple sweetness of that shop completely disarmed him. "I had family matters," he said quietly. She nodded, but didn't quite believe him. That day he bought a small bouquet of white carnations, and although April tried to hide it, she felt a knot in her throat when she saw him leave through the door again. Not because he was leaving, but because something in the way he looked told her he was saying goodbye, and she wasn't wrong. That night, Ian met Elena for a commitment dinner with a group of investors. She was radiant, in a tight black dress, and her perfectly rehearsed smile. While watching her speak fluently about figures and alliances, Ian felt a stab of disgust toward himself. She took his hand under the table, and leaned in to whisper, "I need you focused on this. After the wedding, everything will be easier." He could barely contain the urge to pull his hand away. But he didn't, because in his world, things didn't break so easily. On the way home, in the car, with the driver, his phone vibrated. It was a message from April. "Today you didn't have to invent an excuse to come. Even so, I waited for you anyway." Ian closed his eyes, feeling how that simple line destroyed him inside. Because she didn't know it, but he was already lying. He was lying to Elena, to his father, and also to April. Because although he increasingly desired to stay in her small world of flowers, he didn't know if he would be capable of giving up his own. That night, he dreamed again of the flower shop, of her laughing among sunflowers, of rain hitting the glass, and his hands trembling when he touched her. But upon waking, he only found the same frigid silence of his penthouse, and he knew he couldn't continue like this much longer. The following days at the flower shop were different. April felt it in the air, in the flowers that withered faster than normal, in the heavy silence when he entered, in the words they no longer pronounced, but that floated in every glance. Ian kept coming, always punctual, always with that expression of a lost man searching for something, and still not finding it. But April was beginning to notice cracks in the facade. One Wednesday morning, A regular customer came in to buy peonies for an anniversary. While April prepared the bouquet, the woman was leafing through a magazine on the window table. "How I envy these people's weddings," she commented, showing the page. "Have you seen it? The eldest son of the Blackwells and his fiancée. A perfect couple." April barely paid attention, until her gaze fell on the photo, and her heart skipped a beat. There in the center of the page, was Ian, in a tuxedo, smiling next to a stunning woman, dressed for a gala. In golden letters, the headline announced, "Wedding of the Year, Ian Blackwell and Elena Sterling." The entire world seemed to stop. The customer's words echoed in the distance, but April no longer heard them. All she felt was an icy void opening in her chest, accompanied by a dull and bitter rage. When the customer left, April closed the shop earlier than usual. She needed time to breathe, to understand why she felt so betrayed, when he had never promised her anything. But the next day, when Ian appeared with his usual bouquet and tired smile, she could no longer pretend.
Who are you really?"
she shot out, without even looking at him.
He
Stood motionless, the bouquet halfway between his hands and the counter. "April, don't say my name," she interrupted, fixing her eyes on him.
"I saw the magazine."
"I saw the photo. That woman, your fiancée."
He closed his eyes, as if each word hurt him.
"It's not what it seems. It's not what it seems," she repeated, sarcastically.
"Of course.
"I suppose you just forgot to mention it, that it's not important, that I'm not important." Ian left the bouquet on the counter, and looked at her with a mixture of desperation and defeat. "You are the only thing that matters now, but there are things I don't know how to break yet." "Well, don't come here until you know how," she whispered, with a broken voice. The bell rang when he left, but this time he didn't look back before closing the door, and she, when she was alone, felt like the entire shop was falling on top of her, that every flower, every petal, every aroma, was a cruel mockery of what she had begun to feel for him. The days passed, and he didn't return. She didn't expect him to either. But every time someone crossed the door, her heart jumped in her chest, only to sink again, when she realized it wasn't him. At night, she wrote in the notebook he had given her. She wrote his name over and over, as if by writing it so much she could tear it from her heart, but she couldn't. And meanwhile, high in the city, Ian looked from his window at the dark sky, knowing he had destroyed the only real thing he had had in years, and wondering if he was still in time to recover what he had lost. The nights became long for Ian after April threw him out of her life. Every corner of his penthouse seemed a cruel reminder of everything he had lost. His reflection in the mirror returned the image of an empty man, more worried about contracts and appearances than about what really mattered. And now the only thing that really mattered had slipped through his fingers. Elena noticed the change immediately. One Friday morning, while they had breakfast on the terrace of her family home, she took his hand with a possessive gesture. "Lately you've been distant, Ian. This can't continue like this. You know our wedding is just around the corner, and we can't give rise to gossip." Ian looked at her without emotion. For the first time he saw Elena for what she was, the perfect piece of a puzzle he no longer wanted to belong to. "There won't be a wedding," he said calmly, withdrawing his hand. Elena froze, her lips parted in surprise. "What do you mean there won't be a wedding?" she spat, between a whisper and a roar. "Who has put these ideas in your head?" Ian stood up and looked at her steadily. "The woman who made me realize that all this is worth nothing." That same afternoon he went to see his father. He found him in his office, reviewing documents. The man received him with a cold look. "I've already heard about what you told Elena. I hope you haven't forgotten what's at stake." Ian took a deep breath. "I don't care what's at stake. I can't keep living like this." The silence in the room became unbearable, but for the first time in his life, Ian felt like he was breathing. That night he packed some things in a backpack, left the penthouse behind and settled in a small hotel near the square. From the window he could see, in the distance, the green awning of April's garden. He didn't go looking for her immediately. He knew it wasn't enough to show up and tell her he had broken his engagement. He had to show her, truly, that he was willing to change. For several days, He showed up in the square before she opened the shop. He bought coffee, sat on a bench, and watched her from a distance as she raised the metal shutter and arranged the flowers. He never went in, he just watched her, waiting for the right moment, and every night he returned to the hotel with the bittersweet sensation of having been close, but unable to touch her. Finally, one rainy afternoon, Ian, almost identical to the one when they met, he dared to enter. The bell rang, and April looked up, surprised. She was paler than usual, and had reddened eyes, as if sadness had been visiting her too. He approached the counter slowly, soaked to the shoulders, with his hair stuck to his forehead, and his eyes burning with emotion. "I broke my engagement," he said without beating around the bush. "I left my house, my surname, my world, everything I had built, because I understood that none of that made sense if I can't share it with you." April looked at him, without blinking. She said nothing. He swallowed, feeling his heart beating hard. "I don't expect you to forgive me immediately. I don't expect you to trust me again right now. I just want you to know that I'm here, and that I don't plan to give up." She lowered her gaze, trembling, fighting against tears. She had wanted so much to hear those words, but she also knew she couldn't let herself be convinced so easily. Ian understood, and yet for the first time in a long time, he smiled, because now, at least he was fighting for the right thing, and as he went out into the rain again, he swore he would do everything in his power to recover what he had lost. The hours passed slowly at April's garden. That afternoon, the rain had stopped, but the sky remained covered with dense gray clouds. April couldn't stop thinking about what Ian had told her the night before, that he had left everything for her. And although something inside her softened, when remembering it, fear was still there, whispering that she shouldn't believe in promises too big for someone like her. That's why, when the bell rang again at dusk, her chest tightened. It was him, soaked, with a determined gleam in his eyes, as if he had crossed an ocean just to see her. But this time, he didn't come alone. Behind him a group of men entered the flower shop, carrying large wooden boxes. April stepped back, confused, as the men deposited the boxes one after another, until they filled the shop. Then Ian approached, with open hands, trembling, but firm. "I want you to listen to me," he said, with a broken voice. "I've spent days thinking about how to show you that I didn't come here to distract myself, that you're not just another one, that what I found with you, I never had anywhere else." He knelt in front of one of the boxes, opened it and revealed its contents. Hundreds of small plants, rare, exotic, brought from nurseries and gardeners from all over New England. "All this is for you. I want people to not only come here to buy flowers, but to feel what I felt when I first crossed your door." April watched him, astonished, as he handed her a set of keys with a tag. "April's greenhouse. I rented an empty space next to the square. I restored it. It's ready to open, and it's yours. I want to help you grow, because you taught me what it means to put down roots." Tears rolled down April's cheeks without her being able to contain them. No one had ever done anything like that for her. She hadn't even imagined it possible. Ian stepped back, unsure, searching her gaze for some sign of acceptance. "You don't have to answer now," he said. "I just wanted you to know that I'm willing to give everything for you." April covered her mouth with her hands, unable to speak. In her chest a storm of emotions clashed against her fears. But deep down, she was beginning to believe that he really was there to stay. He turned around, ready to leave, but just before opening the door, she called his name. Ian stopped, and turned, his heart on edge. "No one," she said, with a trembling voice. "No one had ever done anything like that for me." He sketched a broken smile, understanding that this was the first crack in the wall she had built. They stayed there, in silence, looking at each other, while April's tears continued falling, like raindrops on the petals of her flowers. And if this scene made you feel something deep, if it touched some fiber of your heart, give it a like right now, and stay with us until the end, because there was still much more to say. The rain returned that night, as if the sky wanted to clean everything that had been left in the air between them. April hadn't been able to close the flower shop after Ian left. The boxes were still there, stacked in a corner, like witnesses to a gesture impossible to ignore. She had spent hours sitting in front of the leather-bound notebook, writing his name over and over, trying to understand why her heart insisted on betraying her reason. Finally, when the bell rang again shortly before closing, she already knew it would be him. Ian entered soaked, without an umbrella, without a jacket, with his shirt clinging to his body, and an expression that mixed fear and hope in equal parts. He stopped in the center of the shop and looked at her without daring to take another step. "I couldn't stay home knowing that maybe you still hate me," he murmured, with a thread of voice. "I couldn't sleep thinking that maybe you'll never forgive me." April didn't respond. She looked at him for a long time, feeling how something inside her, which had been frozen for so long, finally melted. She walked slowly toward him. Her hands trembled, but her gaze didn't waver. She stopped in front of him, so close she could feel the warmth of his breath, and then raised her hand to brush away a strand of soaked hair from his forehead. "I don't hate you," she whispered, with a tear sliding down her cheek. "I would hate you less if you didn't mean so much." He closed his eyes, as if those words were a balm for every wound. Slowly he raised his hand to take hers, and brought it to his chest, where his heart beat furiously. "What I feel for you, I never felt before. Not for Elena, not for anyone. You taught me what it is to love, without conditions." April lowered her gaze, fighting against tears, but this time she didn't pull away. When Ian tilted his face toward hers, their lips met in a slow kiss, full of all the things they had never said. A kiss that tasted of rain and flowers, of broken promises and dreams to rebuild. In that moment, the entire shop seemed to fill with life. The flowers, the bouquets, even the drops sliding down the glass seemed to shine brighter. April closed her eyes, and allowed herself, for the first time in a long time, to stop resisting, because she was tired of fighting against what she could no longer deny, that she loved him, that she had loved him since the first day he looked at her like no one had ever looked at her. Ian hugged her tightly, as if he didn't want to let her go ever again, as if that small corner of the world was all he needed, and April, between sobs and smiles, rested her forehead on his chest, letting herself be enveloped by the warmth of his arms, by the sincere beating of a man who had finally dared to choose her. "Don't leave me alone again," she whispered, barely audible. "Never," he promised, holding her tighter against him. "Never again." They stayed there in silence, listening to the rain in their own hearts, while outside, the city continued spinning oblivious to the small victory of two souls that had finally found each other. That night, April fell asleep embraced by him, with the feeling that finally, fear had made room for love. Months later, the square awakened to a radiant spring. The street lamps still lit flickered lazily, while the first rays of sun tinged the wet cobblestones gold. In the corner where before there was only an empty space, now flourished a new home, a wide and luminous greenhouse, covered with glass and full of impossible colors. A wooden sign hung over the entrance, with hand-carved letters, "April's Greenhouse." The door opened, and a slight aroma of jasmine came out to the street. Inside, April walked barefoot among pots and shelves, arranging bouquets, adjusting flowers in their place. She wore a simple white dress, with her hair loose, and on her face shone a peace she had never known before. "How are you doing?" Ian asked from the entrance, leaning on the frame with his hands in his pockets. She looked up and smiled at him. That smile that still disarmed him every time. "Almost ready," she replied, "but I still can't find where to put the sunflowers." He approached slowly, wrapping around her from behind, and rested his chin on her shoulder, while surrounding her with his arms. "Wherever you want to put them, that's their place," he murmured, kissing her cheek. April closed her eyes, breathing in his scent, feeling how the fear that once bound her was no longer there. Now there was only that warm certainty that finally, she was exactly where she should be. After so many months, after tears, silences, broken words, she had understood that love wasn't a perfect story, or an easy path. It was a daily choice, an act of courage in every gesture. Ian had understood it too. He had left behind the surname that had defined him his entire life, the empty promises, the soulless contracts. And he had done it for her. For the eyes of that florist who once gave him back the direction he had lost, and much more. "I love you," he whispered, breaking the silence. "And I love you," April replied, turning to kiss him. Both stayed there, among pots, flowers and glass fogged by the rising sun, remembering everything it had cost them to get to that moment, and swearing to each other, without need for words, never to let go again. Outside, the square was already bustling with life, and some people began to stop in front of the greenhouse window, smiling at the burst of colors behind the glass. No one knew the complete story behind those flowers, but it was enough to see them to understand that when love is real, it always blooms in the most unexpected place. And if this story touched your heart, if you ever felt that love also found you when you least expected it, subscribe right now and join us for more stories like this. Because in the end, we all have an address that only someone special can help us find. April and Ian looked at each other one last time that morning, and together, they opened the doors of the greenhouse, letting light, flowers and hope flood the square, because when one dares to truly love, life finally blooms.